In a world that moves too fast, we all need a place to pause. Welcome to the Shadow Chapters, a place where stories breathe and time slows down. Here, every tale is a doorway, an escape from the ordinary. So sit back, take a breath, and let the story take over. Subscribe now and begin your journey one chapter at a time.
The world had shrunk to ash and silence. That's all Kiarrah knew now. She stood on a hill overlooking what was once her home. The Silver Moon Pack, a name that used to mean laughter and family, was just a memory. Now it was a graveyard of charred wood and broken dreams. The wind whispered through the ruins. It didn't carry the scent of pine and hearth fires anymore. It carried the stench of old smoke and deep, unending sorrow. Every gust felt like a ghost, a reminder of everything she had lost in a single, terrible night of fire and fury. Kiarrah clutched a small, soot-stained locket in her hand. It was the only thing she had left. Inside, a faded picture of her parents smiled back at her, their faces frozen in a time before the darkness came. Her heart ached with a pain so sharp it felt physical. It was a constant companion, a heavy stone in her chest. She was the last one, the sole survivor of a massacre orchestrated by a king known only as Alpha Sentinel. He was a monster, a shadow that had devoured her world, leaving her utterly and completely alone in the ruins. She looked up at the cold, indifferent moon. It offered no comfort, no answers. It just watched, as it had watched the night her world burned. Her wolf, a part of her soul, whimpered within. It felt the loss too. The pack bond, a vibrant web of connections that had hummed with life, was gone. There was only a void where it used to be. The silence was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It screamed of absence, of stolen futures and silenced voices. She was a lone wolf in a world that had taken everything from her. But in that crushing emptiness, a tiny spark flickered. It was small, almost insignificant against the vastness of her grief. It was defiance, a refusal to let her story end here, buried in the ashes of her past. She would not be just a victim. She would not be just a memory. The fire had taken her home, her family, her pack, but it had not taken her spirit. It had forged it into something new, something hard and resilient. This was not the end. It was a terrible, painful beginning. Her mind often drifted back. It was a painful journey, but one she couldn't stop. She remembered the warmth of her mother's kitchen. The air would be thick with the smell of baking bread and herbs. Her father would be telling stories by the fire, his voice a low, comforting rumble. These weren't just memories. They were ghosts. They haunted her waking hours and filled her dreams. She remembered running through the forest with the other pack pups, their laughter echoing through the trees. Life was simple then. It was safe. It was full. She saw her own reflection in a still pool of water. The face staring back was not the girl from her memories. That girl had soft eyes and an easy smile. This face was hardened. Her eyes held the deep, weary look of someone who had seen too much. The innocence was gone, replaced by a guarded watchfulness. She remembered the coming-of-age ceremony, the pride in her father's eyes as her wolf form was revealed. She was destined to be a Luna, a leader, a protector. Now, she was just a survivor. The day it all ended played on a loop in her mind. The screams, the chaos, the sight of Alpha Sentinel's warriors, their eyes glowing with a cold fury. They moved with brutal efficiency, their silver weapons glinting in the firelight. She had been hidden by her mother in a secret cellar, told not to make a sound. She had listened to the sounds of her world being torn apart from below. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. Emerging from the cellar was like stepping into a nightmare. That was the moment she truly became alone. The pack bond had snapped. The psychic connection that tied every member of Silver Moon together had vanished, leaving a gaping wound in her soul. She had called out with her voice and with her mind, but only silence answered. She walked through the devastation for hours, searching for a sign of life, a single survivor, but there was nothing, just the silence and the dead. The weight of that solitude settled on her shoulders, a burden she would carry every day. The wilderness became her reluctant home. It was a harsh and unforgiving teacher. The first few weeks were a blur of hunger, fear, and cold. She learned that survival was a constant battle. Every rustle in the undergrowth could be a threat. Every sunrise was a victory. She was no longer the cherished daughter of an alpha. She was a creature of the wild, stripped down to her most basic instincts. She learned to hunt, not for sport, but for sustenance. Her paws grew tough, her senses sharp. Her wolf, once a symbol of community and pack life, became her greatest tool for survival. Together, they were one entity, moving through the dense forests and across rugged mountains. She learned the language of the wind and the secrets of the streams. She found a strange sort of peace in the solitude. There were no expectations here, no pitying glances. There was only the raw, honest truth of nature. Live or die. She chose to live. She grew stronger not just in body but in spirit. The wild was stripping away her sorrow, replacing it with a core of steel. She found a cave hidden behind a waterfall, its entrance veiled by a constant mist. This became her sanctuary, her den. It was cold and damp, nothing like her warm room back home, but it was safe. It was hers. Here she could let her guard down, just for a moment. She would trace the patterns on the cave walls, her thoughts turning from grief to something else, a slow-burning anger, a desire for more than just survival. The wild had taught her to be strong, to endure. Now, she needed a purpose for that strength. Her transformation was profound. The girl who had hidden in a cellar was gone. In her place stood a warrior. Her frame was lean and muscular, her eyes holding a fierce intelligence. She was no longer just running from her past, she was preparing for a future where she would not be a victim. The wilderness had not broken her, it had reforged her. She was a survivor, yes, but she was also becoming something more. She was becoming a reckoning. Survival was no longer enough. The fire in her heart was not just for warmth, it was a fire for justice. The name Sentinel echoed in her mind, not as a source of fear, but as a target. He had taken everything from her. He had tried to erase her people from existence. She would not let that stand. She would not let their memory be forgotten. Her purpose became crystal clear, solidifying from the mists of her grief. She would face him, not just for revenge, but for reclamation, to reclaim her story, her power, and her future. She began to train with a new intensity. Every hunt was a practice session. Every climb up a steep cliff was a test of her endurance. She pushed herself to the limits, honing her skills as a fighter. She learned to move with the silence of a shadow, to strike with the speed of a viper. Her wolf and human forms became seamlessly integrated, two halves of a single, determined weapon. She was preparing for a war that she would wage alone. This wasn't about hate, it was about balance. It was about making things right. The thought of his fortress, a place spoken of in whispers as the Iron Citadel, did not intimidate her. It fueled her. It was the heart of the darkness that had consumed her life, and she would walk right into it. She started gathering information, listening to the conversations of travelers and rogues she encountered on the fringes of the wilderness. She learned of the fortress's location, its defenses, its master. Each piece of information was a stone she used to build the path to her destination, a path that led directly to Alpha Sentinel. Her quest was not born of simple vengeance. It was a journey to find herself again. Who was Kiarrah without her pack? Who was she without her family? She was the last echo of Silver Moon. She carried their legacy within her. To face Sentinel was to face the architect of her ruin, but it was also to prove that he had not destroyed her. He had created his own adversary. She was not just a survivor seeking retribution. She was a Luna claiming her destiny, even if she had to carve it out of the heart of her enemy's kingdom. The Iron Citadel rose from the mountains like a jagged black tooth. It was a monument to power and fear, its walls thick and imposing. Smoke curled from its towers, staining the sky a dirty gray. This was Sentinel's domain, the place where he reigned over his conquered lands. Kiarrah watched from the cover of the woods for days, studying the patrols, the changing of the guards, the rhythm of the fortress. It was a cold, lifeless place, a stark contrast to the vibrant warmth of her former home. Fear tried to creep in, but her resolve was a shield against it. Infiltrating the fortress was a test of everything she had learned. She moved through the shadows like a ghost, her every step silent and deliberate. She used the skills the wild had taught her, becoming one with the darkness. The air inside the walls was heavy with oppression and unspoken sorrow. She could feel the pain of the people who lived under Sentinel's rule. It was a familiar ache, a reminder that her pack was not the only one to have suffered at his hands. This realization strengthened her purpose. This was bigger than just her own loss. She found him in the throne room. It was a vast, cold hall of stone and steel. Alpha Sentinel was not the monster she had imagined. He was just a man. A powerful werewolf, yes, but a man nonetheless. He sat on a throne of black iron, looking not triumphant but weary. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were filled with a deep, ancient sadness. When he saw her, there was no immediate aggression. There was only a flicker of surprise, and then recognition, a jolt, a pull, something that went deeper than enmity. The bond hit them both like a physical blow, a connection she had thought dead, a bond she had never wanted. Mate. The word screamed in her mind, a cruel twist of fate. The man who had destroyed her life, the architect of her pain, was her destined partner. The universe had a sick sense of humor. All the anger, all the carefully constructed plans for revenge, faltered in the face of this impossible truth. She stood before her greatest enemy, her fated mate, and the air crackled with a storm of conflicting emotions, hatred, grief, and an undeniable, soul-deep connection. You? Sentinel's voice was a low rumble, filled with a weariness that seemed to settle into the very stones of the hall. It wasn't the voice of a tyrant gloating over his power. It was the voice of a man carrying an immense burden. Kiarrah's hand, which had been resting on the hilt of a hidden blade, slowly fell to her side. The violent confrontation she had prepared for felt wrong. The raw pain in his eyes mirrored the pain she saw in her own reflection every day. This was not a simple battle of good versus evil. It was far more complicated than that. Why? The word was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the cavernous room. It was the only question that mattered. Why her pack? Why her family? She needed to understand the reason behind the ruin of her life. She deserved that much. She braced herself for excuses, for justifications of power, for the cruel logic of a conqueror. She did not expect the wave of grief that washed over his face. He did not look like a king. He looked like a man haunted by his own actions, a prisoner on his own throne. Sentinel did not offer excuses. He offered a story of his own loss, of a devastating plague that had wiped out his own pack years ago, a plague he believed had been deliberately engineered by rival alphas, including, he had been led to believe, Kiarrah's father. His campaign was not one of conquest, but of misguided, grief-fueled revenge. He had been chasing ghosts, fed lies by those who sought to use his pain for their own gain. He had become the very thing he sought to destroy, a monster who created orphans and left nothing but ash in his wake. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. His pain did not excuse his actions, but it explained them. It painted him not as a soulless monster, but as a man broken by grief, just as she was. They were two sides of the same coin, both shaped by catastrophic loss. The mate bond between them was not a cruel joke. It was a mirror, forcing them to see their own sorrow reflected in the eyes of their sworn enemy. The desire for violence faded, replaced by a profound shared sense of tragedy. The truth did not bring forgiveness. Not yet. The wounds were too deep, the scars too raw, but it brought understanding. Kiarrah looked at Sentinel, truly looked at him, and saw the shell of a man hollowed out by his own deeds. He had built an empire on a foundation of lies and sorrow, and it had brought him no peace. The Iron Citadel was not a fortress. It was his prison. He was as trapped by his past as she was. The rage in her heart began to soften, making way for a complex and aching empathy. Sentinel did not ask for her forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it. Instead, he offered her the truth. He opened his records, his correspondence, showing her the manipulated reports and false testimonies that had led him to her family's doorstep. He showed her the names of the true culprits, the shadowy figures who had fanned the flames of his grief for their own political gain. He was offering her not an apology, but justice, a chance to redirect her anger toward those who were truly responsible for the destruction of two packs. They talked for hours. The sun set and the moon rose, casting long shadows across the throne room. They spoke of their families, of their lost homes, of the crushing weight of being the last one. It was not the conversation of mates finding each other, but of two survivors finding a common ground in their shared desolation. For the first time since the fire, Kiarrah did not feel completely alone. In the heart of her enemy's fortress, she found someone who understood the depth of her loss, because he was living it too. The path forward was unclear. The chasm between them, created by violence and death, was vast. The mate bond was a fragile thread stretched taut across that abyss. But as they talked, sharing their stories and their pain, that single thread began to strengthen. It was not a bond of romance, not yet. It was a bond of shared experience, of a mutual desire to heal. They had both been victims of a larger, more sinister game, and now they had a choice to make: to remain consumed by the past or to face the future together. They made a choice, not as mates but as allies. They chose to build something new from the wreckage of their lives. The first step was justice. Together, they would dismantle the network of lies that had led to so much destruction. Sentinel, using his power and knowledge, and Kiarrah with her unyielding spirit and first-hand experience of the consequences. Their shared purpose gave them a new direction, a way to channel their grief into constructive action. It was a difficult alliance, fraught with painful reminders, but it was a start. The Iron Citadel began to change. The oppressive atmosphere slowly started to lift as Sentinel, guided by Kiarrah's perspective, began to rule not with fear, but with a quiet strength born of regret. He started to mend the damage he had caused, not just to her, but to the other lands he had oppressed. Kiarrah became a voice for the voiceless, a symbol not of vengeance, but of resilience. She was not his Luna in the traditional sense. She was his conscience, his partner in a long and arduous process of atonement and rebuilding. Healing was not a straight line. There were days when the grief was overwhelming, when the sight of him was a painful reminder of the family she had lost. There were moments when the chasm between them seemed too wide to ever cross, but they held on to the fragile hope they had found in that throne room. They learned to lean on each other, finding solace in their shared understanding. The mate bond was a quiet hum beneath the surface, a promise of a future that might one day be possible once the ghosts of the past were laid to rest. Their story became a testament to the power of resilience. It showed that even from the deepest ashes of ruin, new life can grow. It spoke of the strength it takes to choose hope over despair, understanding over revenge. Kiarrah's journey from a lone broken survivor to a beacon of healing was a powerful reminder that our past does not have to define our future. Together, she and Sentinel began to build a new legacy, one not of fire and sorrow but of redemption, forgiveness, and the enduring power of the will to heal.